How Avinoam would translate that.
The old mobster that is used called it confusion of values, and for me that was like one of my biggest sins. And now that they changed it, it's kind of in this one.
Confusion of values. That's interesting. The Hebrew doesn't say anything about values. It just says sort of a befuddled heart or something like that.
Thinking of other ideologies, religions.
Yes. I guess the way I would answer that, yes, I think the way I would answer that, Claudia, and Bob suggested maybe they're thinking of like confusion about other religions. I think the Machzor wants us to be coming from a place of kind of not settled personhood, because we have all these kinds of sins and whatever, but at least sort of settled faith that we're here and we're engaged in this thing and it's going to work for us and all of that. And so confusion might kind of hinder that process. I suspect that now whether or not that's a wise or reasonable request that the Machzor makes is that's totally up in the air. But I think that's probably what they're getting at.
I would think it would be more of a sin to think you know it all and you're not confused.
Right. Right, yeah, so Gary said it's maybe more of a sin to think that...
You're not confused.
Right, if you're not confused, you're probably not paying close enough attention, right? Yeah. Yeah, life is confusing. No, yeah, right. No, I think that's true. What's that?
Here comes your translator.
Oh, yeah. Avinoam, how would you translate Timhon Levav? A befuddled heart? A confused heart?
Yeah.
Confused, yeah, okay.
Part, not just confused like.
So Levav, right? So Levav, at least in biblical Hebrew, Lev is both the seat of. We think of Lev as the seat of emotion, but Lev for the ancients and even for like the medievals, when Rambam talks about Lev, he's talking about something that's often translated by like scholars as the heart mind. That it's not such a clear distinction between the intellect between the head and the heart, right? So Lev sort of encompasses, but more than what we mean by either of those two sort of binaries. Yeah, Timhon Levav. It means, confusion, I guess. Thanks, Claudia. That's a really good question. I never really thought about it. I have to say, I never really thought about it. Other questions? See, this is great. People ask questions, and then you have an interesting conversation. This is the whole point of Ask the Rabbi. Other questions? Yes. So is there a question, or that's a good? So Lisa said that basically when she's reading through the list of sins, she feels like she hasn't necessarily dafka committed all of those. She's committed others, or maybe some of those, and it's sort of a general list. And so.
So I would to Claudia's point, I would have skipped over the point.
So you would have skipped over that.
Yeah. Not that I have all the answers, but I would have. I guess I would have think there are other things that I'm more comfortable with.
And so let me put it in the form of a question, let's say that you're not asking, which is that okay, Rabbi? Yes, that's okay. As I said earlier, I mean, the Machzor really isn't enough. It's really a true little quip and a cutting quip that Heschel made about the conservative movement, which is that we're always getting together to form a new prayer, committees about a new prayer book and this prayer book and that prayer book. We've got to switch from the Silverman to this one to Machzor Chadash and all of these different things. But at the end of the day, whatever book you have in your hand, but it's still you who has to do the work. And yeah, the Al-Khaitz are just sort of a guide. Though I will say, as I read through this list, so I have sinned willingly and unwillingly. I have definitely hardened my heart. I've definitely been thoughtless. I've definitely done idle chatter. Sexual immorality I won't necessarily cop to.
No one asked you.
But actually I don't. Whatever. Okay, but openly and in private for sure, knowing and deceitfully. By the way we talk, all of these things I've done. Defrauding others, I don't think I've actually defrauded others, but okay. Like I think I have done. To your point, I think I have done a lot of them, and depending on how I interpret them, I've done a lot of them.
Yes, and I know, and I sit there and I think, oh, I did that. And even, here today I may have thought about something that I should have. So it's hard to be perfect all the time, but I do feel such a guide.
Yeah. Question, Darren, yeah.
So I have a question.
These don't all have, by the way, these don't all have to be about Yontiv or whatever, but they can be whatever you want. Anyways.
So mine's not about Yom
Yeah.
Kippur. So it's more about prayer. And, I grew up in an Orthodox shul. There was everything was Hebrew, right? I mean, everybody, I'm convinced, I know 95% of the people who were sitting in that shul for 100 years probably didn't understand one word or very few words of what they were doing. But it was very ritualistic and perhaps there's some value in that, I don't know. And it's funny because I actually gave my relatives in England live stream. So then you did this mindfulness thing because I've taken it to the other side of it, and I haven't actually got a chance to talk to them because it's that they were. I could just imagine from their traditional mind, So I guess my question in that is, do you see there as a line? I mean, while you want to make sure there's a meaningful experience in the prayer and what you're doing, but how do you keep that ritual real and unchanged for the benefit of people in the future?
Yeah, it's a really big question about sort of the nature of. It's not really about the nature of tefillah or prayer, but about the nature of liturgy. So there's an important distinction, right, between liturgy, which is sort of the public programmatic theater of prayer, right? There's a liturgical element to prayer, right? So liturgy is what we do when we get together and we pray along with the Siddur, right? And then there's prayer, which are the movements, the utterly unique individual movements of the heart. And ideally, liturgy is supposed to make prayer possible. Right? It's supposed to render prayer possible and open to all Jews. Right? Some of us are like King David maybe, and just religious poetry just pours out of us. But the rest of us often need a Siddur. And we need someone to tell us what words to say and when to say them and so on and so forth. So liturgy is supposed to be a very democratic, maximally inclusive program that allows every Jew to pray. Right? Even if you're not a poetic, even if your heart doesn't overflow with prayer all the time, no, you can actually open up the Siddur, and you can do it in community, and you can get down to praying, right? So that's what our liturgy is supposed to do. If our liturgy is not doing that, right, for any number of reasons, whether it's because people don't have comfort with Hebrew, or whether it's because it's a tune you don't know or a tune you don't like, or whether it's because, it's a Siddur you don't like, or for any reason, if the liturgy is not doing that, the liturgy is not doing its job. Right? There's something broken there. And in my opinion, liturgy is fundamentally subservient to prayer. Or liturgy is parasitic on prayer in the technical, sort of scientific sense, which means that liturgy only exists by the lights of prayer, not the other way around. We have liturgy because we have this impulse to pray, And it gives us a way to do that in a way that's consistent and meaningful and forms community and traditional and all of these different kinds of things. If we have a form of liturgy, for instance, I mean, in my opinion, just my opinion, but in my opinion, the avodah, the traditional avodah service, where you're like reading about, or chanting in Hebrew about where the Kohen sprinkled the blood and how they did it and all of these different things, I just don't know that many Jews for whom that actually, genuinely is an opening into that kind of experience. It's not to say that there are none. I'm sure that there are some. I just have not encountered that many of them in like American Jewish communities. I just haven't. And so for instance, for the Avodah service this year and many years in the past, I've done sort of guided meditations and different kinds of mindfulness things for a couple of reasons. First, I think it's usually a point in the service when people could use kind of a break or a different kind of experience, but also because I really actually do think it's very traditional. I mean, the Avodah service it is a guided meditation on this ancient ritual. I mean, whoever the rabbis who put together the Machzor, and then of course the rabbis in the Talmud who discussed the laws of prayer the laws of sacrifice for 500 years after they had, none of them had ever seen a sacrifice. They thought that there was something important about, or authentic about, sort of meditating on these things. So, I think that speaks to the question a little bit. Yeah. That's a good question. Other questions? Yeah, Lisa.
So this is a little off topic, I think, but
There's no off topic.
next week I was invited to dinner in a friend's sukkah.
Uh-huh.
And the invitation said RSJ style, which I've learned is Russian-speaking Jew style.
Russian-speaking Jewish style?
I don't know. I don't
Sorry.
know what it is either.
The question is, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. Anyone? So Lisa got an invitation to someone's sukkah for everyone online. It said Russian-speaking RSJ style. Russian-speaking Jewish style. If anyone who's watching us online knows what that means, please contact Lisa after the Chagim, because none of us know.
Yeah, I don't know. I was surprised. It's in Brooklyn. So
That makes sense. There are some Russians there, right?
There will be vodka.
There will be vodka. Yeah.
Maybe that's all it means. Yeah.
Maybe that's all it means.
Potato vodka.
Any other questions about anything in Jewish life? Yes.
A while back, like I was trying to understand praying, but in a sense, I didn't really know how to, or what to do, means that when we just start in prayer, am I supposed to say God, holy ruler of the universe, creator of heaven and earth, and then start my prayer, or can I just talk to God just like how I'm talking to any other human being?
Great. So the question is exactly this. There's a question about when I pray, can I just talk to God like I'm talking to any other human being, or do I have to say, Baruch Atah according to some book or whatever? That's the question?
Yeah, in a sense, I don't really know how to pray. In a sense, in terms of that,
In terms of which?
In terms of how am I supposed to say it, or what am I supposed to say?
Well, I think that the traditional Jewish answer, which I'll give to you, is that you got to have both, right? The rabbis, both ancient and modern, think that there is profound value in sort of formal communal prayer in a book and encountering the Siddur and saying the words and sometimes thousands of words in a sort of a traditional mode. And they think you should also have experiences and time where you just talk to God like you talk to a good friend. And ultimately, they would probably tell you that it is the latter that is ultimately the higher form of prayer, because that's when you're, that's the Amidah is supposed to be sort of fundamentally what it is it's an audience with God for you to say whatever you want, and Rabbi, so.
Like even when I'm home sometimes, like even when my mother said to me, I want you to try praying, like in my mind I'm thinking, am I supposed to like get down on my knees on my bed, or can I just like hang out on my chair or something like that, or like can I take a walk or something?
Yeah, so the question was sort of a little bit about choreography in prayer, whether you can take a walk or whether you get down on your knees. And Jewish tradition is full of a menu of options. So there's a famous description of Rabbi Akiva, that when Rabbi Akiva was praying with the community or was leading on behalf of the community, his prayers were sort of very short and, to the point. He got it done and he wasn't particularly showy about it. But then when he was praying alone, he would start off on one side of the room and he would wind up on the other side of the room because he had had so many different protestations and so many different things, right? So there's a distinction, I think, between how we pray when we're in public and how we pray when we're alone. There's a distinction in terms of how we pray when we're sort of settled at home or how we pray when we're on the road, right? There's a description in the Talmud about if you're riding on your horse somewhere and it's time to say mincha. Well, ideally, you're supposed to get down off your horse and say mincha, on the ground. But if you can't, for some reason it's not safe, you basically say mincha, the afternoon prayer, while you're riding. And that's fine. So Judaism offers, like with many things, a menu of options when it comes to how we pray and in what way. Maryut, a question.
I'd like to follow up on Shane's question.
Sure.
About saying when I'm at home, pray out loud, pray in my mind when we're here and reading. We have a book, a prayer book. Should I be like, I don't read the long stuff. I'm not reading the Hebrew. I'm reading the English side. Should I be like kind of saying it out loud, or if I just think it, if I just read it, is that acceptable? Just read it, or should I be like actually mouthing and reading the words and sort of saying the words quietly, or is it okay to just think the words?
So Maryut had a question about whether or not we're supposed to be saying the words either in Hebrew or in English, same thing, doesn't matter, either out loud, or is it okay to just kind of say them kind of in your mind? I'll give two answers to this. The first answer is, fundamentally, whatever works for you to get into prayer. That's the fundamental thing. The second answer, though, like the traditional kind of answer that, you can imagine maybe one of the ancient rabbis giving, is that you're really supposed to kind of say them out loud. This is for a few reasons. One of which was, there was a reason, there was a very reading in the ancient world. Standard reading was very often out loud. It's like Kriyat HaTorah doesn't really mean to read the Torah. It means to sort of declaim the Torah, to read out the Torah. And there's a famous a passage, I believe Augustine visits St. Jerome, who's an early church father, and St. Jerome is studying something. And Augustine writes in his diaries that he was amazed because St. Jerome was reading. Okay, he knew that he was reading, but his lips weren't moving. In other words, he had never seen, really, Augustine's a very learned fellow, right? Had never really seen or encountered someone who was reading, but reading sort of internally. And so I think in Jewish prayer, if you're in a traditional community, including this one, people are kind of chirpy during prayer. They say, "Ah!" They say a certain pasuk jumps out at them, and they say that out loud, or parts of the service you're definitely supposed to say out loud, like Kriyat Shema, like you're supposed to basically. It's not that the first paragraph then you go silent. It's the first paragraph, and then you're supposed to basically say it in an undertone. So I would say that, again, whatever works, but the traditional Jewish answer would lean towards you're supposed to sort of form the words, because at least the tradition thinks that there's added power in that, I think.
Seems like God can't read people's minds. Moses, he really misunderstood Moses and the people all the time. Or God, not God, he, but God. And so So that would cause the prayer quietly to be a different.
So it's interesting. Maryut suggests a theological notion here, which is that based on a number of episodes in the Tanakh where God seems to let's misjudge what the people are going to do, maybe God can't read minds, and maybe speaking out loud is sort of somehow more communicative in that way. Well, maybe. God is described in many ways. God is also described as Zocher Kol HaNishkachot. God knows all the things that are hidden. There's actually a particularly, one of my favorite brachot, which I've never actually gotten to say, because you say it when you see like 600,000 Israelites in one place, and I've never seen that. There's a bracha that I think Ben Azai goes on top of the Temple Mount, and he looks down, or on Mount Scopus, and he looks down at Yerushalayim, and he sees, throngs of Israelites, and he says, Baruch Chacham HaRazim. Blessed is the one who is wise in secrets. And the way this bracha is understood by commentators and by the Gemara there is that he's basically saying, there are all of those people down there with these. And it's amazing, by the way. If you're walking through Times Square one day, just pause and think about the internal lives of all the people around you. It's crazy to think that, you're going through the world, but they are too. And all the things that, are deeply, deeply troubling to you, they're not thinking about, and vice versa, right? And God knows all of these things, that's what this bracha is about. So, I don't know. Other questions? Gary, yes?
I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but you're speaking, before you said the laws of prayer, you said I meant the laws of sacrifice, but I think the laws of prayer is an interesting concept, because you're sort of presenting prayers, there really are no laws of prayer, it's what works, but there is certainly a significant stream of the tradition which very much has laws of prayer to the point of how often, if you take an art scroll Siddur, you look in the back, there's a section called laws, and if you forgot to put in this addition at this time, should you start from the beginning, or should you leave it go, or and on and on and on, and the formality is maddening, even whether you're out loud or quiet. Yamida, nobody's supposed to hear you, and all. So I just think that at least acknowledging. I'm not supporting that. I'm just saying we have to acknowledge that there is an important part of the tradition that speaks from two sides of its mouth, because some of the same folks are going to also tell you.
That's right. That's right. So Gary is saying, basically his question is, Rabbi, what gives? Because you're talking about whatever works, but there's actually vast amounts of Jewish law about exactly how you're supposed to pray, and what you're supposed to say, and when you're supposed to say it. And yes, that's 100% true. Not only should be acknowledged, it should be valorized as important. I really do believe it is important. I mean, Jews are supposed to pray 3 times a day, and it's the law, because if you didn't have the law to pray 3 times a day, most of us, or certainly me, would pray probably never in the day, right? It's very easy to, if there's no laws governing your behavior, right, to become very, very lax. And it's true. The laws of prayer are rich and lavish and detailed. They're very detailed. But at the end of the day, it's also, I think, true that to fulfill your basic, minimal kind of liturgical, halachic requirement to pray, basically you got to say the Shema and the Amidah in the morning, the Amidah in the afternoon, and Ma'ariv, don't let anyone tell you, is kind of an optional service, according to the rabbis. I mean, but basically you got to say Ma'ariv at night too, right? So you say Shema in the morning, the Amidah in the morning, Amidah in the afternoon, and Shema and Amidah at night. I mean, that's it. Really, I mean, of course there's volumes of other kinds of things about if you forget this and what you do here, but that's basically it. And so I think it is true and authentic that despite the copious and detailed and important halachas of davening and of prayer, it's also true that I think the tradition recognizes authentically and has always recognized that, look, there are many different ways of praying, and there are many different kinds of prayer, and that there is a distinction between prayer and liturgy, right? Liturgy is important, right? You gotta get together with Jews to shake the lulav at the right time, and say shachar at the right time, and say kaddish and all of these things. But there's also this aspect of your prayer life, which is in some ways distinct, I think. But yes, Gary, that's a good. Thank you for the what gives question. That's an important question. Other questions about anything? We got, like in theory, 15 more minutes of questions, but we don't have to use them all. Steve, yeah.
I think this conversation, there's this whole concept that there's a yoke of commandedness that we have. It's not about me. It's not about what I think. It's not about whether I think it's a good idea or not, but
Right.
that I'm obligated, whether I understand it or not. I think it's a very hard concept for me personally and many modern people. So, and I think this conversation about prayer and what you do and what don't you have to do is like, I'm just curious about it. So as part of the what gives is like, so how much are we obligated to a yoke of commandedness? That's an outdated concept, and we should reframe how we think about our relationship to being commanded. So I'm curious about how you navigate those. That's a very big question.
Big question.
You got 15 minutes. No more.
Big question. Steve asked a very big question about the nature of commandedness. I'm just repeating for the folks online about the nature of commandedness in the present era, the present moment. How we think about the yoke of commandedness, whether we are truly feel commanded in the way that the tradition seems to want us to feel commanded, or whether we sort of reinterpret or can recast that in some. Is that a fair summary of the question? Okay. All right, now let me think.
You pick one tiny example. It's hard.
Yeah, it's a very hard question. It's a very hard question, and one which, I guess I can only answer. I'll try to go at it in a few different ways, and hopefully I'll talk enough that I will sort of answer some of it. Because on one foot, it's a hard question to answer. I spoke a little bit earlier in my drasha, so one thing you'll now get to know about me is that I think about parenting a lot. We all think about, all of us who are parents think about parenting a lot. And I'm no different. But because of my job, and because my job is to sort of put things in religious terms and in theological terms, I find myself drawn to speaking about that a lot. And when I think of mitzvah, commandedness, I think of something, right, that is not optional, right? It's like there's an experience, there's like this chovah, and it describes like there's something grabbing you and squeezing you, and so you gotta do this thing, and it doesn't release until you're yotzei, until you have discharged the obligation, right? This is how the tradition wants us to experience Jewish life. And I will say that, just speaking personally, I have had periods in my Jewish life, when I have felt that way, right? When I have felt that, before I put on my tefillin in the morning, and by the way, I'm not in one of those places now, I will admit that. And I have not been in some ways since I've been a parent. But I have had the experience where, like, until I put on my tefillin, I have this, like, nervousness. Like, I gotta, not a bad nervousness, not like I'm like, but like, I gotta do this thing. Like, I gotta do this thing. I need to do this thing. It's on my schedule, and I gotta do it. Until I do it, I'm gonna be thinking about how I have to do it. Which is why you do it first thing in the morning. And then I have the experience of, oh, I did it. I feel so light. And now I'm ready to go have breakfast. Right? I have had that. Right? So those kinds of. So while I think it's true that the philosophical concept of mitzvah can be hard. It's like really the master of the universe, the creator of all things, really cares. Like I have a cheeseburger or not. Really? I mean, I don't know. Right? It's hard for me a little bit intellectually, philosophically as well. But experientially, I think those experiences of mitzvah are open to us. And I think that leading a life of mitzvot or leading an observant life can open us to those experiences and can render those experiences possible. It doesn't say that they always happen, but I think they are powerful experiences. And when I talk about commandedness, I mean the true kind of hardcore commandedness I didn't feel until I was a parent, until the sound of the crying. It's just like it makes you insane, and you'll do anything to make it stop, right? And I learned something in parenting that I hadn't understood in any kind of way before about what it really means to be called by a voice that really commands me. Not like, commands me in theory and I can kind of think about how it commands me, but no, it grabs you by the throat and says, you have to do this thing. It's not optional. And I think an observant life opens us to those kinds of experiences, and I think those are powerful and valuable experiences, because at the end of the day, we're not really in charge. I don't know who's in charge, but it's certainly not us, right? And I think it can sensitize us to that fact. But does it always happen? No, it does not always happen. And are there ways in which, the concept of mitzvah, at least in terms of like really discrete particulars, like shaving, let's say. I mean, I use an electric razor because, I'm firm like that, and I don't use it. But really, I mean, is it really commanded not to use a straight razor in the same way that I'm commanded to take care of my kids? I don't know. But I think leading an observant life at least opens us to the possibility of those experiences. Rhonda.
My question has to do with your talk earlier today.
Sure.
When you talked about how we're in a dark period
Mm-hmm.
in society right now. And my question is, do you feel like we're coming to the end of the dark period and the beginning of a light period, or where do you think we are in
I don't know. So, I mean, I'll talk out of both sides of my mouth here, I guess. On the one hand, and at least the drasha I gave today, I know was a little heavy, but there's a part of me that feels very heavy, right, with the world. I mean, there's a part of living now, I think, that feels very heavy. I mean, like my sister lives out in San Francisco, and there's fires every year now, and it's like the moon was really yellow last night, because of the smoke, and our kids were looking up and saying, "Gosh, why is the moon so orange?" And Felissa said, "Well, because there's these, miles of fires burning across." I mean, it's heavy, sort of. I mean, and I think that the pandemic is heavy, and we're schlepping it around. There's a phrase in Yiddish, you're schlepping the gullus. You're schlepping the exile around on your back, And I feel that. I mean, I also feel like, and maybe this is sort of just an article of faith, because I think it's hard to be a religious person. Maybe it's hard to be a person altogether without believing to some extent that, I think it was Martin Luther King was right when he said, the arc of the universe is long, but it basically bends towards justice. And I think that that's, also basically true. I mean, look, for the vast majority of human history, just to take, one example where I think we've had progress, one thing that gives me hope, okay? The most historically oppressed group of people of all time, without question, is women, I think. Half the human species, and for vast swaths of human history, what was open to them was like motherhood for the most part, and motherhood, right? What's that?
prostitution?
Okay, prostitution. Okay, yeah, a few other things, probably, and of course there have been extraordinary women throughout history who have done extraordinary things. But the accomplishments of feminism, for instance, before my lifetime, but extending into my lifetime, and before your lifetimes as well, in many of, right, are real, right? I mean, I'm looking at women lawyers and doctors, and that's just totally normal, has been a normal part of my experience, and rabbis, has been a normal and part of my experience my entire life. And so, wow, that's progress, and I don't think that's going anywhere, and so I think, I hope that we're at the beginning of a light period. I mean, I do think the pandemic is going to end, but I thought it was going to be over, in June of 2022. I remember Phyllis and I said, I think by my birthday, June 12th of 2020, I think by my birthday it's going to be okay. Well, that didn't happen. But I hope we're at the beginning of a light period. Other questions? We got 5 more minutes, and then we gotta say mincha. Shana tova. Gemar chatima tova. יש לכם עוד שאלות? All right. Well, I'll be the rabbi here for a while, so you can always ask me a question. Thanks for doing Ask the Rabbi. It's fun. See, you have interesting conversations. That's what Ask the Rabbi is. It's all about. We'll start mincha in about 5 minutes. For everyone online, if you want to take 5 minutes to get settled, we'll start in about 5. I'll come back. We could have asked you. We could have asked you, Rabbi.
Oh, no.
What's that? We did get some good questions. Yeah, you always get good questions. Mr. Softy truck came by twice. You ought to be a really high-level meditator, not to think about the Mr. Softy.
When we were leaving this place, it's not fair.
It's such a that's sad too. Like whenever you hear it,
Like
burn.
you know what happened? These kids outside our house were playing basketball with their school bus, and it was playing a song that our kids jingle. So I thought it was like in LA.
Oh, thank you. We didn't have them out here. They look beautiful.
And it was the
Yeah. There's a Curb Your Enthusiasm. Do you guys watch Curb Your Enthusiasm? There's a Curb Your Enthusiasm where it plays a prominent. Yeah, where the song plays a prominent role. Okay.